while the floods are not the only adverse weather patterns in recent weeks, destructive waves due to a springtide surge also resulted in damage in coastal areas. For more on these weather events, we're joined by Guy Midgley, who is in with Stellenbosch University School of Climate Studies. Guy, good evening to you. Thanks for your time. You know, many South Africans are saying, well, you know, we should be technically halfway through the first month of spring, but it certainly doesn't feel that way.
Well, what you've got to realize is that, sorry, my lights just went off. What we've got to realize is that these spring and autumn periods are quite challenging because of the mix of climate conditions as we move from seasons to season. You know, the potential for these extreme events goes up, and we see this in the so-called shoulder seasons. So these are, you know, we clearly are seeing the signs of a climate that is being juiced up by additional energy that we've been adding into the ocean temperatures and into the atmospheric temperatures, into the humidity, and it is now starting to show in these extreme events. And, you know, one has to sympathize with people who've lost so much, including human lives.
What's clear, Guy, is that our infrastructure, at least in most parts of the country, simply has not been geared up for some of these extreme events. And that, of course, presents an incredible challenge at times when storms, floods, and all sorts of other disasters hit.
You're absolutely right, and we must learn from events like this so that we build back better. When we rebuild bridges, when we rebuild infrastructure, we do the engineering properly, we look into the future, and we make sure that those structures will survive at least a century. So to avoid having to continually invest money into recovering from these disasters and risking people's lives, risking the arterial supply of goods and services, these are things that put a lot of pressure on society. And this is how climate change will affect us initially, is through these extreme events, which become more and more frequent. So disaster management, your hearts go out. They're working incredibly hard, and we need to support them. We need to fund those units, train them, and give them all the support we can.
One of the things that also comes to mind is the extent to which our municipalities, you talk about, you know, emergency response personnel and the need to continuously be training them, but are our municipalities actually geared up to future-proof themselves against such disasters too?
That is happening. The climate change bill, the new climate change bill, will also make that an element of what municipalities need to achieve. And in general, our society has to become resilient. You know, I always say that countries that are adapting well to climate change will be successful. Those that fail to adapt will fail. It is going to be a big differentiator of countries going into the next 2-3 decades. This is an international competitiveness issue. It is an international issue relating to equity and, you know, the funding required to build our resilience is absolutely essential. The Central Treasury must really, I think, start to budget for these sorts of things, because it will pay back many times over getting prepared.
Just on that issue, Prof, one of the things that we see is that, of course, there are areas that become more affected than others. And by this I mean just some of the visuals that we're looking at here are, you know, you'll have in informal settlements almost everything is completely washed away, whereas in your more formal areas, the infrastructure is able to just to stand that much longer. And how much of that do you think is going to be a particular challenge for South Africa, given the high levels of inequality that are already prevalent in our society?
Yeah, I agree. Look, I think some formal structures are also taking a significant strain, depending on how far they are away from the seafront and from river frontage. Sometimes those are expensive properties, and those can be the first to be damaged But in general, you're absolutely correct. It is informal settlements which tend to be pushed to the edges into areas that are more at risk of flooding, especially flooding. So this is going to be, we always have said from the 2000s, climate change is a poverty issue. It affects the poor most viciously. And the economics doesn't necessarily account for it. If you're poor and you lose everything, you've lost everything. But in GDP terms, it may not reflect so much. So we've got to look at what really affects people and invest correctly, I think, at the top levels, and ensure that we build resilience into communities. And this is going to be a really big way to increase equality, is to build resilience of the people who are most susceptible. So let's use this opportunity, the potential access to international funding, to help us. And that way we will build inequality, we will build better equality, improve people's prospects, and increase resilience. This is we should really start to see this as a massive opportunity and an investment pathway to a more equal society.
I'd like you to just please expand on this idea of building resilience. What does that look like? How can we reimagine our society, reconfigured or even restructured differently to what it is right now?
Well, Southern Africa is urbanizing very, very fast. So this offers us a great opportunity to construct neighborhoods and urban settlements that are not as badly affected or are unaffected by climate change. This means identifying areas that are less prone to extreme events, creating spaces in those areas that protect them from heat waves. So using urban greening as a way to do that, making sure that the ways that they drain through stormwater is designed in a way that will tolerate increases over the next 5 to 10 decades. It's about forward planning and creating the city of the future, which gives you all that resilience. Giving houses solar power so that they are individually resilient. There are many, many ways to build resilience, and it offers great opportunities for better quality of life, better environmental conditions, safer environmental conditions, without having to go down and dig for dirty coal in livelihoods that are really, bad for people's health and aren't helping any of us.
I want to finally take a look at the issue of early warning systems. And, when we looked at what happened in KwaZulu-Natal, and it's going to be a very general example because they've had, of course, various rounds of floods over a series of years, really. But, from about the time that the first floods hit in 2019 and what we've seen in the last 2 years, we see that municipality, and I think South Africans in general, seem to be getting better at just being prepared or being aware, if nothing else, of adverse weather that's coming up. But do you think we can be doing more? Is getting a notice sort of the day before or at night, is that enough really? Can we not do better than that?
I think we actually potentially can do much better, and we have a fantastic weather service. The South African Weather Service does really great research and has incredible records, long-term records of change, and all sorts of really important and interesting and valuable products to offer South African society. What I think where we've got to get it right is the communication to the finer spatial scale, down to particular regions, down to particular sub-regions. I think, for example, we could have avoided some problems if we'd been able to communicate to restaurant owners on the shorefront that they should actually close their restaurants for those days or those hours where there was peak high tide, and that could have avoided some significant threats to human life. Luckily, I don't think we lost anybody's lives in those restaurants. But think about that risk. So I think there are ways in which we can communicate, and it's a two-way story. It's about communicating and having the people who need to get the message aware that the message is coming, what to do about it, how much credibility to give the message. You know, there's a lot of risk about pulling the trigger. Say you want to evacuate a neighborhood. That takes a lot. You know, there's a lot of resistance. People don't want to leave their neighborhoods. We've seen that happen over and over again. So you've got to build trust, provide the opportunity for people, you know, make it easier for people to move people out of harm's way. Cuba does this very, very well, but they do it, you know, very much top down. It may not work that well, yeah, but you know, it's a communication. It's a two-way communication. The giving the message, the accepting, the fine-scale nature of the message. There's a lot we can do, and Treasury, you know, our central budget should really be supporting weather services and the new framework for climate services in this country, because it's going to be a central part of the success of this country over the next decades. Absolutely.
Midgley, Director at the School of Climate Studies at University of Stellenbosch. Thanks for your time tonight.